This is Creative Love Radio, episode number 3, The Love Shadow. Welcome to Creative Love Radio with Debbie and Dr. Rob. With love, the old rules of dating and commitment no longer apply. The technology's changing, roles are changing as women are stepping into their power all around the world. And the way to approach relationships needs to evolve with them. We are redefining relationships to guide you to greater love, more success, and living your purpose through the latest research in neuroscience, Jungian Psychology, and Eastern wisdom. Get ready for another inspirational episode of Creative Love Radio. Hello again. Welcome to another fantastic episode of Creative Love Radio. And today, this is Debbie Maldonado, also known as Debbie Burnt. And I'm here with my partner, Dr. Rob. And today we're talking about the love shadow. Everyone wants to know about the shadow. Some people don't, but we're going to talk about it anyway. It's going to be it's a fun topic. It's an interesting topic.
Yeah, but we got a lot of requests to talk more about the shadow because it is such a fascinating topic, and there's a lot of misconceptions about the shadow. So let's begin there.
What's the number one misconception?
The number one misconception is that the shadow is always evil. That it's something ominous and bad. Now, of course, there are people that have dark shadow because of the nature of their psyche, right? If you think, you can use your mind to create a great work of art or to help people and cure cancer. Or you can use it to create weapons of mass destruction and all. The same mind creating those things, right? So the same thing with the shadow. Of course, it can be very
useful, beneficial for the public.
It can contain talents, opportunities, great things that we pushed away, and it can also contain very bad things. But most people fall in the middle, right? Somewhere, our shadows just kind of stuff that we rejected about our personality, our persona, like Jung says, and that we pushed away into the unconscious.
So, in other words, the way to think about it is that in consciousness, there are so many extremes, right? The very, very good and the very, very bad. Like it's everything, right? Everything is in this consciousness. And that within our ego, our small little individual mind, through experience, we categorize what we find good or bad. And that is what creates how we interact with all of that is available to us. And so then as we collapse down into that ego, we don't have access to, we do have access to all of that, but we're basically limiting our personal experience through just what we experienced in life. So if we're not brought up in a war, we would have a different kind of psyche than someone who's had a different experience, but all that consciousness that we all share, that collective consciousness is something that we all are connected to in some way.
Right. So, excuse me. If we think about the persona then as the mask that we want to share with others, what we want to show of ourselves to the world, we think of it the shadow of the things that we don't want to show of ourselves to the world.
The things we personally judge as bad,
wrong, or simply non-adaptive.
Yes.
Right. As we were growing up and we were developing our personas, there were things that we said, well, this is not going to serve me in this environment. I'm going to push it away. I'm going to put it in the storage bin of the psyche. Now, Jung called this part of the psyche the personal unconscious. So the personal unconscious just means precisely that. It's personal in that it's an unconscious part of our psyche that we can't see on an everyday basis, but that it's personal in that it's stuff that we used to know or that we consciously rejected and pushed away, or that we simply forgot about. All right, so it's personal in that sense. It relates to our personal experience.
And it's based on the assumptions that we personally made through that experience in that individual moment of what was the best way to act or what was the best way to be, or what witnessing what someone else did is wrong or invasive or so for instance, if someone was brought up in a chaotic household, they may create a persona of being very, very rigid because it was the way they survived. They had to like kind of survive in that chaos by becoming very, very like a perfectionist, right? They couldn't be around all that chaos. If there's a lot of emotion, maybe they would do the opposite. Not in all cases, but that's an example. So what would be in their shadow is all that emotion and that chaos. And so when they would go out and date, they would either probably find a lot of men that were very reflective of their shadow, that pattern from their childhood of the chaos and the emotion and the drama. And they're trying to like be in that experience, being very controlled, and then they're limiting their own emotion. Like they're not allowing themselves to feel. So the shadow isn't bad. Like it's not bad to feel emotions. It's just that when they experienced emotions, maybe when they were younger, that became like not a taboo, but like almost like a threat.
Right.
And so we tend to create our personality and our persona around that so we can survive. So that's just think about if you're very intellectual all the time and you have a hard time sharing your emotions, think about what assumptions you made as a child.
Why are you looking at me?
That made that happen. You know, and a lot of people think, you know, I love what you say is that a lot of people assume that men don't have any emotions. You know, they don't feel, but they feel just as much as everyone else. It's just socially, they were conditioned, don't cry. You know, the little girl can cry and be, you know, coddled by the mother, but the boy had to like, hey, you got to be tough, right? And so that's where the shadow comes in. It's like the man has to put all that emotion in his shadow. Not in all cases, again, it's just generally that's what happens. We never want to make assumptions that everyone's the same and everyone who had the same childhood has the same results.
Right. So how does this play into relationships? Now, here's where projection comes in handy. If you think about, okay, we're rejecting these parts of ourselves and throwing them into the shadow, right? Mm-hmm. Putting them in the dark part of the psyche where we can't see them. Now the psyche has to deal with that energy somehow, right? That all those elements we put into the personal unconscious, it's got to do something with it. What it does, it projects it outward so that we can see our shadow in other people, and voila, we got rid of it.
Voila.
It's outside. It's not me. It's them who have the problem. It's them who are overly emotional. It's them who are overly rigid. Projection is such a great mechanism because it allows us to feel okay about ourselves and get rid of all the stuff that we reject about ourselves. Mm-hmm. But we see it in others, mm-hmm. right? People that trigger us, they're showing us our shadow. They're mm-hmm. showing us the things we reject about ourselves. So whenever we feel that strong emotion arise, when we see people doing things, being obnoxious or being overly social or whatever triggers us, those are aspects of our shadow that we rejected. Now, the way it plays out in relationships is incredible because now, if we're not conscious of it, we're going to attract people that are going to show us our shadow very precisely.
So we want someone that matches our persona, that are consciously what we consciously want, but everyone says, why do I keep ending up with what I don't want? And that's the shadow.
Exactly. So it accounts for why we often get the opposite of what we intend. Mm. Like you say, we want somebody to match our persona, somebody that's going to look good besides us, and it's going to be accepted by our family, and our friends are going to love them, et cetera, and we end up with the opposite.
And, you know, it's really interesting because we all hear people say, and I used to say this too, is just the right person. When am I going to meet that right person, and we keep getting the same type of person. And then we start making assumptions that all men are a certain way or all women are a certain way. And maybe it's because I'm older now and I have less choices. And, our mind makes up all these reasons why we're getting the results without saying, well, maybe this is something in me that I'm seeing. And so we keep pushing away the people that are wrong for us or that give us heartache and say, let's move on. Let's find another person. Let me keep going out there. Or maybe we just figured, I don't want to go out there at all because I keep getting that same result. So why even try? We don't realize that we're actually in charge of that projection. We can create the world or the type of person in our life. We can bring them in if we understood our shadow. And that's really powerful. Like I used to think that I'm meeting all these unavailable men. Why are they all unavailable? Those darn men. But people, I remember when I moved to Colorado, a girl told me, she said, oh, you're going to like the men in the Midwest. They're so much more into marriage than the people in New York City. And I went out there and I was like, okay, same situation. I moved, 2,000 miles away, still getting the same result. It's because I brought my mind with me. It's not about where you're going. A lot of people say, where did you meet Rob? What website did you go on? Was it Match.com? Was it this service? A lot of people actually joined the service that we met at, the dating service. And it's like, no, it's not the service. It's what was going on in our mind. The service just facilitated us meeting, but what created the meeting was not a numbers game, and it wasn't being in the right place at the right time. It was our mind being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, so
I had to realize that I was the one who was unavailable in a long, drawn-out story. And once I realized that, I was able to, it's almost like you start to see the reality in a new way, and you start to take back your control. And again, this isn't to blame yourself, like, oh, I'm such a bad person, or I did it all wrong. It's more like, oh, now that I know I'm creating it, that means I have the power to change it. But until you recognize and take responsibility, it's always going to be a chance meeting, or somewhere out there that person's going to come in and change my mind and make me feel happy.
Yeah.
No, it's inside of you. And I think that's the hardest thing for people to take, is that responsibility.
Well, there's a lot of aspects to the shadow, right? At that level, yes, it's that if we are not conscious of our shadow, we end up in bed with it, basically.
Yes, that has happened.
Literally. But as we start to become conscious of our shadow, and Jung calls this integration, right? We're integrating it back into our awareness. It's like inviting it back into our consciousness and saying, why am I keeping you away? You're my evil twin. Just come on back in and let's talk about this. And that integration then becomes or allows us to feel more whole. Instead of being divided against ourselves, always kind of trying to prop up our persona and keep the shadow away. And now we're more relaxed. We know there's good and bad to us, and that a lot of it just depends on how we see things. We're not so uptight about how we're going to come across. We can be our genuine self in a sense. That allows more energy into creating a relationship, right? Instead of just looking for my persona match, I'm really expecting somebody to relate to me in a more meaningful way than just on the surface level. That changes the whole dynamics of relationships now.
Well, when you talk about integration, a lot of people, and I know when I first heard it, integrate your shadow. What does that mean? Well, it's, in my experience, and a lot of people can relate to this, is that finding that unavailable person. And when I realized that I was the unavailable one, it was almost like I had to reclaim that, like, oh, that's me. And at first it was very like, I was very resistant. Like I was shocked. I was like, no, I'm the one. But all of a sudden it was like my whole life flashed before my eyes of all the times I pushed people away and how I avoided ending a relationship. I would just disappear when things didn't work out. how I didn't confront and ask for what I wanted in relationships. And I was like, I am the one who's really avoiding. I'm the avoiding one. It's not out there. And then integration is really understanding why I did it. And what I really understood on a deep level was it was fear. I was afraid. And then I kind of questioned, like, oh, why am I so afraid of getting close? And just examining all that. That's what we call integration. It's like not projecting it out there and saying the problem's out there, let me go find another solution. It's like, let me understand why this pattern, why these people are reflecting that back to me, and understanding myself of why am I doing this to myself? And when I realized why, and it was just fear, and I moved through it, that was integration. And then I didn't have to defend it anymore. And it didn't show up out there. And actually I met you like a few weeks later. It was like 8 weeks later that I really met you, after I had that like aha, like, oh my God, I am the unavailable one. So it happens really fast. But it took a while for me to get there because of how the ego defends and doesn't want you to see the shadow. So let's talk about that for a little bit. Like why is it so hard to see the shadow?
Yes.
Why was it so hard for me to see that?
Right. Well, if we think about why we created the shadow in the first place, right? So let's go back to kindergarten.
Oh, nerdy Debbie in kindergarten.
So we're creating a little persona for ourselves, right? And saying, I'm this way and this is who I am. I'm the tough kid, or I'm the smart kid, or whatever kid we are. And the opposite, we have to push away into the shadow. All right. Now, why do we have to push it away? Because it doesn't fit. It doesn't help us survive. It doesn't, it could threaten our identity, our sense of self in that environment. So when we grow up then and we start to look at our shadow, it feels very scary because it's going to take us back to that original fear that made us push it away in the first place.
So it's an emotional charge. That's why a lot of people will say, why haven't I know my patterns, but how come I can't change it? Is because they didn't get to the emotion of it. They just got to the logic of it.
Yeah. And it's very scary. It feels like you're back in that threatening situation where you need to have this mask to protect you. The mask is like a shield, and the shadow is threatening that shield, that protection that you feel. If it feels like you're going to be exposed, like you're going to be vulnerable and open to attack or something. So once, as adults, when we start to open up the shadow part of the psyche, it threatens the persona. Mm-hmm. Everything we've constructed and we spent so much time polishing up and making pretty and shiny. Now is being threatened by this emotion, this feeling of you're gonna be vulnerable here,
and we don't even know why. It's just scary, It's like it's not a non-logical. Emotions are non-logical. They're based on survival, and that initial little girl or little boy that created that defense is no longer around, but the pattern is still there.
Yeah.
And that's why as an adult, we were like, why am I so afraid? Like, think about this, going on a date with a stranger. Why do I have so much anxiety? Why do I feel like, oh, what if they don't like me and all that? Why is that such a big deal? Like, from a logical standpoint, it just doesn't seem rational. But because you're like a powerful corporate executive and you have like 20 men working for you, but you go on a date and it's like you're turned into that little girl again. It's that mind of the shadow has such a pull on us that we just fall into this pattern of submission sometimes, especially women and men too. Like, this woman's on a pedestal or this man's on a pedestal and they're going to come save us. And then we have that anxiety. I hope I can live up to their expectations of me.
Yeah. So as we start to see it for what it is, then we get a different perspective now, because remember, this is energy. This is emotional power, emotional fuel. And the psyche actually thrives on this emotional fuel. It is its power source, basically. It is the battery. If you think about inspiration, if you think about motivation, where does it come from? It comes from the emotions. That, it's not like, I have to think, I have this great job and I'm going to go out and do it. Yeah, you need that, but the inspiration and the power to do it in a great way comes from the emotions, right? That you love it, that you have passion for it. So the emotion is really what we want to get at in the shadow. Because remember, when you're split against yourself, you're cutting off yourself from the good stuff that is the passion in your life. It's the emotional piece that you're cut off from. As you start to integrate, as you start to become conscious and open it up, and even it might feel yucky in the beginning or whatever, scary and all that.
Is that a technical term, yucky?
Yes, it's a technical, psychological term. So you start to have access now to this passion that has been cut off from you, or you cut yourself off from. And there's a surge of power now. This integration brings this surge of energy that you can now use in whatever way you want, but in relationships, obviously, this is what people call passion. This is what people call intensity, chemistry, love, that indescribable feeling of yes. It's saying yes to life.
Yeah. And it's interesting that our shadow, that all that energy in the shadow is constantly trying to push, like kind of bleed through, right, our life, trying to like show us, and through projection, like we push it away. But it's like this other half of us that we are not claiming, and it's like locked in a room and it's banging on the door going, hello, I want to be heard. I want to be seen. I want to be loved, right? And so in a way, it's really a gift to have this part of us it helped us function early in life. It helped us kind of not be, like I said in previous episodes, you're not going to act like a crazy person. It helps us act like a normal person in life.
Bit.
Maybe a little, but you're not going to stand naked in front of, the school. Like we all have dreams about being naked, right? And that's that kind of shadow wanting to be exposed, wanting to be seen, and the shame of our persona, like not wanting to hide that. And so when we have access to it, we do have access to all of it. And so here's one thing I was thinking about when you were talking about that passion. What a lot of people feel in dating, that frustration. I want to find that person. You feel that kind of squeezing in. Like as time goes on, you look at your age, you have a birthday, and it's like, oh, I'm 29, I'm 39. When am I going to meet this person? And that pressure. It's almost like that pressure is really coming from inside, that we want to merge with someone else. And so a lot of people think of that as negative, that frustration. But what it really is just the powerlessness that we feel. And if we can, it's that really part of us that really wants us to be happy, really wants us to have great success and great love in our life. And so if we can reinterpret that frustration as being frustrated energy that wants to be expressed, it's a different way of working, and then we can move toward it. And so if you're feeling frustrated, it means that there's this part of your shadow that's like, hello, and like knocking on the door, wanting to be expressed, and you're pushing it down, and you're not looking at it, or you're not letting it, and you're going, the answer's outside of me. The answer's in that person. If I find that person, it'll all be okay. And so there's the frustration that happens because we can't get it out there unless we get it within ourselves first.
Yeah. It's the old cliche of the caterpillar turning into a butterfly, right? This is the human equivalent of that, right? We've been crawling around, kind of just surviving,
eating little leaves,
eating as much as we can, and making sure we got enough nourishment and all that. And that's great, right? We need to survive to get to that point. But now we come to a point where we feel, okay, there's got to be something more. It can't be just me surviving and getting a good job and driving the right car and having the right relationship and all that. There's got to be something more. And that the shadow gives us that opportunity, right? So from this perspective now, the shadow becomes our greatest gift in life. This is our greatest opportunity here. And make no mistake about it, it's going to take you to other places in your psyche that you've never experienced before. And it's going to blow the roof off the little hobbit house that you built
Yes.
around the persona. So when a person gets ready to do this work, it is about transformation, right? That's why the whole kind of idea of transformation is so powerful. But you need to know how to do it. You need to understand the nature of the mind so that you can do it in a creative way instead of this fixing, I'm wounded and there's something wrong with me.
Got to forgive my parents.
Yeah, it's not about that. If you understand the nature of it, really what happened in our past is simply a collection of subjective interpretations of our mind that they don't exist anywhere except in our memory.
Yeah, and then in your memory, not in the collective of your family and your early childhood.
Yeah, if you go back and ask people, did that really happen the way I remember it? I guarantee you will not find anybody that remembers it the way you've interpreted it.
Mm-hmm. Well, they even say, like, when they have witnesses in a trial, they don't remember. Everyone could be at the same scene and remember a different scenario because it's all subjective. It's all projection.
It doesn't mean it's not real, but it means that the way it's real to us is in this subjective mind way, and there's nothing wrong with that. So whatever happened, we learn to use it now in a creative way instead of using it in that hurtful, oh, I'm wounded, oh, I'm so broken because all that past and all that emotion and that fear or that frustration, whatever we experienced in the past, has been kind of keeping us locked in that very narrow perspective.
And from a larger perspective, just to close out the discussion on the shadow today, is that when you identify so much of yourself with your personal history, with your personal experience, with the people that hurt you, your parents, the people that loved you, your accomplishments, all those personal ego experiences, that's only a part of who you are. And I think most people, I would say really almost everyone, thinks that that's who they are. They're defined by that personal experience. By facing your shadow and these things that we have rejected and these other parts of us that we haven't expressed yet, then we start opening up to becoming our true self. And our authentic self is not just the princess. And it's not just the nerdy girl. It's not the bully. It's not the class president as we were in kindergarten. There's creative parts of us that haven't been expressed. And, a really, really simple example of the shadow is that we're all brought up not to be selfish. We're all brought up to don't ask for too much or, not everyone, but a lot of people are. And so a lot of us has selfishness in our shadow and we always feel like we don't want anyone to think of ourselves that way. How much has that limited your life? How much do you not ask for things because you're afraid of being seen that way? And how much would your life open up if you just let a little bit of selfishness in, where you'd say, you know what, this is wrong. This is what I want for myself. Everything starts, you start to step into another character outside of that persona that you've developed your whole life, and you start to become someone new. And after you go through the shadow, you really see your life in a completely different way. There are the narrow lanes that you've built around your life and your limitations start to fall away. And then everything starts to change. The love starts to be different. Money starts to change. And what's possible and the dreams that maybe that you never thought you could ever have or ever achieve, or expressions of art that you never thought you could do, start to get created. And so it's really a beautiful way to work with yourself and to see yourself beyond just what happened to you. That when you were born with potential. And when you work beyond the shadow, you get to reacquaint yourself with your true potential. And we often hear those words in motivational speakers, but what does that really mean? And this is what it means.
So here's an interesting little exercise for you. Think about the way you define your persona, right? The characteristics that you like people to identify you as being: smart, industrious, hardworking, attractive, et cetera, et cetera. And then think of the opposite trait. And think about this. Do those people that have those opposite traits out there, do they trigger you? Do they bug you? Do they bring up that yucky, psychological terms again, the yucky feeling of repulsion? That's the beginning of the shadow, looking at your shadow. Right? Understanding to be that's part of your projection, right? Your psyche trying to push that out and project it outward.
And after you identify it, ask yourself, how is my avoiding being like that person limiting me?
In relationships in particular.
In relationships. How, if I could embody some of those traits, what kind of freedom would that give me? And we start to think of, a lot of people think of morals and morality. And if you think about it, there's really do not kill people, some basic.
That's a good one.
That's a good one. Got to keep that. But when we think about being selfish or being rude or being demanding and all those things that we're not supposed to be, who's the judge of that, right? Who is there one, if you really think about it, there's not one objective way to think about it. And everyone, based on culture, your family upbringing, everyone has a different definition. So are you going to just follow and hope that you plug up everyone else's definition, or are you going to create your own? And that's really retrieving that power. So we leave you with that today, and we'll see you on another episode very soon, next week. This is Debbie and Dr. Rob signing out.
See you soon.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to Creative Love Radio with Debbie and Dr. Rob. For more information, visit us on our website at creativelove.com.